There's a moment in every person's life, often silent, often subtle, where you realize that the path you're walking isn't your own. Maybe you're at a job that looks perfect on paper, but your soul is rotting inside. Maybe you're in a relationship where you're constantly compromising, shrinking, adjusting, just to be accepted. Maybe you're surrounded by people, friends, family, mentors, who admire the version of you they created, but who would panic if you ever became who you really are. This moment creeps in slowly, like fog, until you can no longer ignore it. You've betrayed yourself. And Carl Jung had a word for this silent betrayal: the loss of the self. We spend years becoming someone, but not ourselves. We become who our parents needed us to be. We become who society rewarded us for being. We become who our partners wanted to love. We wear masks. We build personas. And slowly, invisibly, we drift further from the only person we'll ever truly know, ourselves. But one day, something inside you breaks. You wake up and realize you don't recognize the person in the mirror. You've been performing for so long you've forgotten your own voice, and that's when the most terrifying decision of your life stands before you. Will you finally choose yourself, even if it costs you everything that was built on the false version of you? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what he didn't say, at least not directly, is this: it will cost you. Choosing yourself might mean disappointing your parents. It might mean losing friends who only knew the edited version of you. It might mean ending a relationship where you were deeply loved, but never truly seen. It might mean walking away from security, validation, and admiration to finally feel alive. But here's the paradox. Not choosing yourself will cost you far more. You'll grow old resenting the life you created. You'll quietly envy people who had the courage to follow their path. You'll live in a prison built of your own people-pleasing, and worst of all, you'll never fully meet yourself. Jung believed that until we choose ourselves, radically and unapologetically, we are merely actors on a stage, playing a role the world gave us. And it is only when we say no to that role, only when we let go of the applause, only when we risk being misunderstood, unloved, even abandoned, that we become real. So if you've ever been told, you've changed, you're selfish now, you're not who you used to be, take it as confirmation, because maybe for the first time, you're not who they made you to be. You're who you actually are. Choosing yourself isn't a rebellion. It's a return to the self you abandoned long ago, just to survive. So, what really happens when you finally make that choice, when you choose yourself above all else? That's what this video is going to uncover, not just the inspiring, but the brutal, not just the liberation, but the losses. We're going to walk through every stage of what it means to turn inward, to face the parts of you that have been hidden, to become whole, even if it breaks your world apart. This is not a motivational message. This is a psychological awakening. Carl Jung didn't mince words when it came to the false life we build for the sake of others. He called it the persona, the mask we wear in public. A version of ourselves shaped not by truth, but by expectation. We all develop a persona. We must. It's part of functioning in society, but the danger, Jung warned, is when we identify with the mask so deeply that we forget the face beneath it. The persona is a system of behavior put on as a mask, but it is not the true self. Carl Jung, think about that. How much of your personality is actually you, and how much is a carefully engineered performance? Are you kind, or are you afraid to say no? Are you agreeable, or are you terrified of conflict? Are you successful, or just playing a role others clap for? Living for others is subtle. It often feels like love, responsibility, duty, but under the surface it's often fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of being seen, fear of being alone. So you adapt, you bend, you contort yourself into what the world seems to want. And at first, it works. People like you. You get promoted, you're admired, you fit in, but over time, something inside begins to rot. You start to feel numb, disassociated, like you're watching your life instead of living it. You laugh at the right times, nod at the right points, but it's all performance. You begin to ask yourself terrifying questions. Who am I really? What do I want? Why do I feel empty even when I have it all? This is the danger Jung tried to warn us about. When you live for others, when your identity is built on approval, you never develop an actual self. You only develop a social strategy, and when life inevitably hits, when the job fails, when the relationship ends, when the applause stops, your entire identity begins to collapse because it was never rooted in authenticity. It was built on borrowed beliefs, conditional love, and invisible fear. But why do we fall into this trap? Jung believed that it begins in childhood. We are born whole, untouched. True. But early on we learn a painful lesson. Certain parts of us are not acceptable. Too loud? Be quiet. Too sensitive? Toughen up. Too honest? That's rude. And so we split. Put the good parts on display and banish the rest to the shadow. We become good boys, good girls, good students, good partners, but in that goodness we lose the truth. Jung warned that unless we reclaim what we've buried, unless we stop living for the approval of others, we remain stuck in a limbo. Alive but not living. Known but not seen. Successful but not whole. And this is where the resentment begins to grow. You resent the people you bend for. You resent the rules you silently agreed to. You resent yourself for not speaking up when it mattered. But here's the brutal twist. No one else is responsible for this but you. No one forced you to abandon yourself. They may have taught you to, but you chose to keep doing it. And if you want to stop, you must be willing to walk the loneliest road of all. The road back to yourself. It means disappointing others. It means losing the image you've carefully built. It means burning down the persona, even if it leaves you with ashes. But it also means freedom. And that's what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole, even if it means no longer fitting in. Because fitting in is a cage. But being yourself, truly yourself, is a door. And that door doesn't open until you stop living for them and start living for you. Before you even learn how to walk, you're already being taught how not to be yourself. It begins innocently enough. A parent, praising you for being good, scolding you for being bad. But what defines good or bad is rarely based on truth. It's based on comfort, conformity, and control. Smile. Sit still. Don't be angry. Say thank you. Be polite. Don't make a scene. Be what we need you to be. From the moment you enter this world, you're trained, often by well-meaning people, to abandon parts of yourself for the sake of acceptance. And because your survival as a child depends on belonging, you comply. Jung referred to this process as the creation of the shadow, the unconscious dumping ground of all the traits society told you were unacceptable. Your anger, into the shadow. Your wild imagination, into the shadow. Your sexuality, your sadness, your truth, into the shadow. But here's where it gets dangerous. You don't just hide these parts. You forget they exist. To be loved, you betray the self, and society rewards this betrayal. Get good grades. Get a respectable job. Smile for the camera. Don't rock the boat. Be successful, not soulful. Be efficient, not expressive. Be nice, not honest. You learn to measure your worth, not by your authenticity, but by your utility. How useful are you to your employer? How likable are you to your peers? How desirable are you to the opposite sex? The world becomes a mirror, but a distorted one, reflecting not who you are, but who you've been trained to be. And every time you choose what's expected over what's true, you go deeper into exile. You laugh when you want to cry. You say yes when you mean no. You compliment people you don't respect. You silence the voice that's screaming inside you. Until one day, you wake up and realize you don't know who you are anymore. Jung understood that this disconnection from the self wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Modern society is not built to nurture the individual. It's built to standardize, to condition, to mold. It needs you predictable, manageable, and compliant. The education system teaches obedience, not self-awareness. The workplace rewards productivity, not introspection. Popular culture sells identity, not authenticity. In this machine, the self is an inconvenience, and so we outsource our identities. We let brands tell us what's cool. We let influencers tell us what's desirable. We let algorithms shape our opinions. The more disconnected we are from our inner world, the more dependent we become on the outer one. And this is exactly how society likes it. A person who doesn't know themselves is easy to control. But a person who chooses themselves, they're unpredictable, they're powerful, they're dangerous. Jung warned that the only way to reclaim your life is to become conscious of the ways you've been programmed to give it away. You must ask yourself hard, uncomfortable questions. Whose voice is in my head when I make decisions? Who am I performing for? What would I still do if no one praised me for it? What part of me did I bury just to be accepted? And most importantly, what would I choose if I was no longer afraid? Because here's the raw truth. If you don't consciously choose yourself, the world will choose for you. It will hand you a life, a job, a partner, a belief system, a script, and call it destiny. But you'll know it's not. Because once you accept yourself completely, you stop being controllable. You're no longer seduced by praise. You're no longer paralyzed by criticism. You're no longer addicted to fitting in. You become someone who stands alone when necessary, and in a world obsessed with conformity, that is radical. But let's be specific. What does choosing yourself actually look like? It looks like walking away from relationships where you're only loved conditionally. It looks like setting boundaries, even if your voice shakes. It looks like quitting the job that pays well but kills your spirit. It looks like telling the truth, even when it costs you the performance. It looks like finally admitting what you want and allowing yourself to go after it. It's not comfortable, it's not clean, and it will make people uncomfortable. Why? Because when you start choosing yourself, you break the contract others made with the false version of you. The contract that said, "You'll always put me first. You'll never change. You'll always agree with me. You'll keep playing small so I don't feel threatened." And when you break that contract, they will get angry. They will call you selfish, difficult, arrogant, ungrateful. But remember this. It's not your job to stay small so others don't feel insecure. It's not your duty to sacrifice your truth for someone else's comfort. And it's not selfish to choose the life that actually belongs to you. Carl Jung believed that self-realization, the journey of choosing the self, was the highest calling a person could follow, but he warned it would not be easy. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because when you choose yourself, you're not just choosing your desires, you're choosing your darkness too. You're choosing to face your shadow, to confront the parts of you that you too have rejected. And this is what makes choosing yourself so rare and so sacred. It's not a luxury. It's not a trend. It's a spiritual revolution. It's waking up and saying, "I will no longer live a life that isn't mine. I will no longer silence my truth to keep the peace. I will no longer betray myself, not for love, not for praise, not for anything." Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's the beginning of becoming whole. Because until you choose you, all of you, no one else ever really can. They'll only love the version you perform. They'll only admire the mask. But when you choose yourself, you finally become someone real enough to be truly seen. And that, Jung believed, is when life begins. There's a moment in every transformation where something must die, not physically, but psychologically. Carl Jung called this the death of the persona. It's the shedding of the false identity you've worn for years, the mask you built to survive, to fit in, to be good enough. And when that mask begins to fall apart, it can feel like you're losing everything, but you're not losing yourself. You're finally meeting it. Let's be honest. Most people spend their lives trying to hold the mask together. They keep up appearances. They say the right things. They pretend to be okay. They smile when they're crumbling inside, because they believe the image is more important than the reality, and society rewards this performance. You're praised for being strong, even when you're silently breaking. You're admired for being agreeable, even when you're screaming. Inside, you're loved for being someone you're not, and that love becomes a prison. Jung believed that the persona is a necessary structure in early development, but if you cling to it too long, it becomes a barrier to growth. The persona is only a mask of the collective psyche, a mask that pretends individuality. Carl Jung think about that. If your life is built on the persona, your individuality isn't real. It's just a curated response to what you think the world wants. And Jung warned that this false self must eventually collapse. But here's the terrifying part. When it collapses, it doesn't feel like liberation at first. It feels like death. The ego panics. The mind rebels. The identity starts to dissolve. And with it, all the things you thought were you. Your job title, your social role, your relationship identity, your status, image, routine. When you start choosing yourself, these attachments begin to loosen. Suddenly, being the reliable one no longer feels like a badge of honor. It feels like a chain. Being the successful one feels hollow. Being the strong one feels exhausting, and the world around you begins to resist your change. People say you've changed. You're not who you used to be. You're selfish now. What happened to you? What happened is, you stopped performing. You stopped pretending to be a version of yourself that pleased others. You stopped ignoring the voice inside you that whispered, "This isn't it." And yes, it's painful, because the persona, no matter how false, gave you structure. It gave you safety. It gave you a place in the world. Letting it go is like stepping into the wilderness. You feel lost, alone, uncertain. But this is where real transformation begins. Jung called this phase the night sea journey, a descent into darkness, confusion, and inner death. In myth, it's the moment the hero is swallowed by the whale. In life, it's the moment you no longer recognize who you are. But this is not the end. It's a sacred transition. The death of the false self is the birth of the true one. You're not losing your identity. You're releasing the version of it that was never truly yours. And on the other side of that loss is clarity, peace, power. When you no longer have to uphold an image, you're free to speak honestly. When you no longer live for validation, you can finally listen to your soul. When you no longer cling to who you were, you can become who you are. But this takes courage. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Because the death of the persona is not a casual act. It's a spiritual rite of passage. It's a burning away of everything inauthentic. And just like a forest must burn to regenerate, you must be willing to let part of yourself die, so the real you can be born. The persona's collapse isn't the worst thing that can happen. It's the best, because beneath the layers of who you pretended to be is who you already are. You don't need to create that self. You only need to uncover it. And that begins with one radical act: letting the false self fall away completely. When you truly choose yourself, not just once, but again and again, something profound begins to happen. You become untouchable, not in the sense of arrogance or indifference, not because you stop feeling, caring, or loving, but because you're no longer a slave to what the world thinks of you. You've claimed something rare, something Carl Jung called emotional sovereignty. So what does that mean? It means your self-worth is no longer on loan. It's no longer something others can grant you or take away. When people disapprove, you don't collapse. When they praise you, you don't get addicted. When they project their fears onto you, you don't absorb them. You become your own center of gravity. This is the outcome of individuation. Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming psychologically whole. And at its core, individuation means this: you are no longer defined by the collective. You are defined by the self. Think about how most people live. They are constantly on edge, constantly shape-shifting, constantly scanning the room. How do they feel about me? Am I doing this right? Will they still like me if I speak up? It's a life of emotional dependence. Even their happiness is outsourced to relationships, status, aesthetics, performance. But Jung taught that the goal of life isn't happiness, it's wholeness. And wholeness requires that you reclaim your emotional autonomy. No more waiting for someone else to give you permission. No more postponing your truth to avoid discomfort. No more believing that your peace lies in someone else's hands. To become emotionally sovereign means you feel your emotions fully, but they don't control you. You see others clearly, but don't lose yourself in their storms. You can walk away, not out of pride, but because your soul is non-negotiable. This is the power of the self that has faced its shadow, that has buried the persona, that has walked through the inner death and emerged transformed. The person who has done that can no longer be manipulated, not by guilt, shame, praise, or fear. But here's the paradox. To become untouchable, you have to first become completely touchable. You must feel everything. Grieve everything. Let yourself be broken open, because emotional sovereignty isn't a wall, it's a integration. You're not above your feelings. You're not numb to them, you simply own them. You become someone who can hold both pain and peace without being destroyed by either. That is the essence of psychological maturity. Jung saw this as the ultimate aim of the inner journey, to no longer be split between the mask you show and the self you hide. To no longer be dragged by the tides of culture, family, opinion, expectation, to walk into the world, not as a chameleon, but as a complete human being. When you reach this point, something incredible happens. You stop needing to prove anything. You're no longer addicted to attention. You're no longer obsessed with control. You stop performing and start existing in presence, in truth, in alignment. And here's the quiet miracle. You'll start to notice that nobody and nothing affects you the same way anymore. Not because you're closed, but because you're whole. Not because you're hard, but because you're rooted. Not because you've given up on the world, but because you've finally come home to yourself. This is what happens when you choose yourself above all else. Not once, not twice, but every single day. You become someone the world cannot seduce, cannot shake, cannot define. You become sovereign. You become untouchable. You become you. Let's flip the mirror now. We've talked about what happens when you do choose yourself, the power, the peace, the sovereignty, but what happens when you don't? What happens when you spend your life avoiding discomfort, pleasing others, chasing validation, and playing small? Carl Jung had a chilling answer. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent. Read that again, the unlived life. It's not just about regret. It's about the psychological weight of a life that was never truly yours, and how it doesn't just destroy you, but spreads into everything you touch. So what does it look like to live a life where you never choose yourself? It looks like constantly saying yes when your soul is screaming no. It looks like working a job that deadens your spirit, year after year, because it's what you're supposed to do. It looks like staying in a relationship where you're tolerated but not cherished. It looks like waking up with dread, going to bed with regret and numbing the space in between. You pretend you're okay. You smile in public, scream in silence. You stay busy enough to never hear your intuition, and tired enough to never challenge your reality. But the cost of not choosing yourself isn't just sadness, it's something worse: invisibility. You become invisible to yourself. Your desires, buried, your instincts, ignored, your creativity, forgotten, your boundaries, violated. Sometimes by your own hand. You become a ghost in your own life. And here's the brutal irony. While you're busy trying to keep others comfortable, you're making yourself miserable. And most of those people, they don't even notice, or if they do, they prefer it that way, because your silence benefits them. Jung warned of this passive destruction, of people who repress their truth for so long that it becomes illness, emotional, psychological, sometimes even physical. He believed that when you don't live your truth, it doesn't disappear. It festers. It comes out as anxiety that won't go away, as anger you can't explain, as depression that numbs everything, as resentment toward everyone, especially yourself, and still, you pretend. Because it feels safer to suffer quietly than to risk being rejected loudly. But make no mistake, safety is not peace. Comfort is not happiness. Approval is not love. Fitting in is not belonging. Carl Jung believed that the soul will keep calling, whispering, nudging, sometimes screaming, until you listen. And if you keep ignoring it, the soul doesn't go away, but your life might. Because here's what happens when you never choose yourself. You spend your prime years living someone else's story. You look back with clarity and realize, I was never really here. You die full of potential and empty of fulfillment, and worse, you teach others to do the same. Your kids watch you sacrifice your joy. Your friends feel your resentment, even if you hide it. Your silence becomes contagious, because unspoken pain still speaks, and unlived lives still echo. But here's the thing, it's never too late to choose yourself. You could be 18 or 80, if you're still breathing, the self is still waiting for you to say, I'm done performing. I'm done betraying myself. I'm done living a life that isn't mine. Choosing yourself might cost you the world you built from fear, but not choosing yourself, that cost you everything. Carl Jung didn't believe in empty inspiration. He believed in transformation. Not a prettier mask, but a new life. And that new life starts with a question. Are you willing to let go of everything that isn't you, to finally become who you are? Because if the answer is yes, really yes, then what happens next is the beginning of everything. So what happens after you choose yourself? After you've faced the storm? After the persona has collapsed? After you've stared into the mirror and said, this is who I am. No more masks, no more lies. What kind of life begins where the old one ends? According to Carl Jung, the reward for this deep inner work, this painful but necessary transformation, is simple, yet profound. Wholeness. Not perfection. Not constant happiness. But a complete, integrated self that no longer lives in fragments. A self that is no longer at war with itself. You begin to notice something subtle but life-changing. You're no longer easily disturbed. You still feel sadness, but it doesn't consume you. You still feel anger, but you don't become it. You still face fear, but it no longer stops you. This is inner peace, and it's not a passive state. It's active. It's the result of deep alignment. No more pretending, no more pleasing, no more waiting for someone else to give you the life only you can build. You begin to experience a freedom unlike anything you've ever known. Not freedom from responsibility, but from false responsibility. You stop trying to fix others. You stop walking on eggshells. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. You move through life grounded, clear and calm. You speak the truth, not to hurt, but to heal. You say no, not out of rebellion, but reverence for your own soul. You say yes, not to gain approval, but because it aligns with your purpose. This is what Jung called the individuated life, a life where you are whole, conscious, and awake. But perhaps the most powerful change is this. You become someone who can truly love without losing yourself. Because now, you don't love from need, you love from overflow. You don't need to be rescued. You don't need someone to complete you. You are no longer chasing the love you never gave yourself. Relationships become sacred, not survival mechanisms. You attract differently, you speak differently, you live differently. Jung taught that the most dangerous person is the one who has not faced their shadow. But the most liberated person? That's the one who has. The one who has walked through the fire and come out holding their own soul in their hands. The one who can stand in front of the world, unmasked, unafraid, and untouchable, because nothing outside them holds power anymore. Not approval, not criticism, not rejection, not failure. They are no longer orbiting other people's gravity. They are the center of their own universe. This life, the life that awaits you, is not a fantasy. It's not reserved for the lucky or the elite. It's available to you. The moment you decide you are worthy of it, you don't have to know exactly how. You don't have to be fearless or flawless. You just have to take the first honest step toward yourself, and then the next, and the next, and the next. You will lose things, yes. You will grieve. You will shed skins that no longer fit. You will walk away from people who never saw the real you. But what you gain is everything you've ever been looking for. Carl Jung once said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." This is your invitation, not just to dream, but to awaken, to choose yourself, to become whole, to live free, to embody peace, to walk as someone the world cannot shake, because you are rooted in something eternal, yourself. And when that happens, remember this: nobody and nothing will affect you again, because you have remembered who you are, and once you do, there is no going back.